My name is niva. I'm a law professor at the University of Haifa, and together with my colleague, Professor michal1, we will talk to you today about protecting consumers in an algorithmic consumer ecosystem. Consumer choice is the cornerstone of market transaction. You need to focus on the choice of consumers in order to allow the signaling of consumers in demand and supply. Now, when we normally protect consumers online, we believe that in order to make a choice, they have to have full information, and therefore consumer protection laws focus on protecting consumers against deceptions, protecting consumers against manipulation, and requiring full disclosure of the data for each and every transaction. What we see is that as we move to a new ecosystem, we need to address new challenges. And this new ecosystem is made of voice-activated devices. For instance, Amazon Echo, what we called Alexa, or Google Home, that enable consumers to activate them by voice. These are always on devices. They always listen to you. And you can tell them to play music. You can check the news. You can check the weather. You can activate your smart home. And these sensors can also predict what your needs are. Do you sound feeling a little cold today? Maybe I should order some Tylenol for you. But these devices should not always be voice activated. We can think, for instance, of wearables that are detecting our heartbeats and could sometimes order vitamins for us. We could think of a smart washing machine that senses that we're short of washing detergent and order it online. We could think of an autonomous car that would drive to the next door gas station when it is running out of gas. All of these devices are creating new challenges. How do they work? So what is common to all these devices is that they are collecting automatically the data that is relevant for some transactions. Based on these data, and sometimes on stated preferences of consumers, that they can identify the need of consumers, whether we need more washing detergents or whether we need a new pharmaceutical drug. They can search for options based on pricing, search engines, based on databases, based on my previous purchases or the purchases of other consumers. And they can make the selection by optimizing the transaction based on available options. Then a shopping bot could actually execute the transaction, make the payment, and issue the order. What is really interesting about this system is that they have a feedback loop, so that the consumer transaction is getting into the stream of other transactions and therefore could inform my future purchases and the purchases of other consumers as well. Now, looking back at consumer protection law, we see that this new ecosystem is really challenging some of the underlying assumptions of consumer protection law. So if in the old paradigm, what we were envisioning was a separate transaction where the consumer has to make a particular choice for the purchase of each and every service, now, and that these transactions were initiated by a consumer based on the information that the consumer would process, right, on his cognitive ability, and then making a choice. In the new ecosystem, what we see that there is a very strong advantage to long-term relationship. The more you use a system, the better it could predict your needs and preferences and be more accurate in identifying the optimal transaction for you. transactions are not initiated normally by consumers. Maybe the choice of using Google Home or Alexa, but then transaction would be initiated by an algorithm, and that initiation would normally be based on data that is collected and data that is consulted in other databases. And therefore, our focus should shift into the data that is available and readable for algorithms. Overall, choice would be based on AI, machine learning, and the data that is shaping these choices. And now the question is, of course, whether this is good or bad for consumers, and to the extent that it creates new challenges, how they could be addressed by regulation. I will now pass it to my colleague Michal to talk a little bit.
Hi, my name is michal1, and I'm excited to be here today. So I'm going to pick up where my colleague, Professor Elkin Koren, has finished, and ask, well, are these systems good for the consumers? Do they serve the consumers? They definitely have a lot of advantages. For example, they offer us lower transaction costs. Algorithms, for example, can read websites. They, of course, can make speedier decisions comparing large databases. They can create more sophisticated decisions because they're capable of comparing more parameters. They also lower consumer biases. For example, they don't care about they are not affected by the color of the packaging. They consume less decisional energy, which means that we have then more decisional energy to make other decisions in our life. And they also can offer us personalized products which are better suited to our specific needs. However, there are, of course, also downsides. So, of course, one is privacy and exposure to cyber risks. But beyond that, we have new threats which are created. For example, do these algorithms convey or shape the preferences of the consumer? Do they create fair transactions? So one of the concerns here is that the algorithm does not necessarily serve the consumer. The algorithm might manipulate consumer choice. It might manipulate the data or the code in order to serve the interests of the supplier or the manufacturer. And it also creates externalities beyond the transaction. For example, how is the data which is collected about us, how is it used in other transactions? Now, these concerns are strengthened by a few issues. For example, algorithms for many consumers are a black box, no information on how the decision is made. There are also what we call information disparities. The consumer does not have a comparison benchmark if he's not exposed to the options and the transaction is personalized. Also, the supplier knows much more about the consumer than ever before, and that, of course, creates an information disparity which can be used to the advantage of whoever is operating the algorithm. And also there are power disparities here because the consumer might be locked into an algorithm which knows a lot about him. So what can be done? What can be done? A few things. First of all, I think it's really important to ensure that we have as much competition as possible in this world of algorithmic consumers. Why is that? Because competition may affect the which applications reach potential users and the trade terms that they are offered. So to do so, what we need is to empower consumers to oversight their systems and create stronger pressures on the demand side by switching to other systems. How do we do that? We can do that by affecting the entry points of consumers by providing information on data and choice parameters and affiliations. For example, how does my autonomous car decide where to fill on gas? We can affect exit points, for example, by facilitating data portability and data interoperability. We might create or strengthen market oversight by facilitating the creation of comparison algorithms which provide information on the relative qualities of the different algorithms which are provided in the market, and also facilitate the entry of benign algorithms, what Professor Elkin Koren and myself have called algorithmic consumers in our own work. Beyond transparency, there are also important regulatory measures that can be taken when choices, when choices defer to an algorithm, we might be cutting the persuasion to the consumer. So what might be done here? First of all is, at least with regard to some algorithms, we might mandate neutrality, as has been done in some systems already. Also, data exclusion. We might mandate algorithms not to take into account certain parameters, or data inclusion, take into account certain parameters. For example, compare at least 5 options, some of which are not your arm. So in short, this brave new world requires new thinking, and we have written a bit about these issues. Thank you very much.